Hello and welcome to LSO St Luke's. My name is Rachel Leach and today I'm joined by musicians from the London Symphony Orchestra. Elizabeth Burley on piano, Rhys, Watkins and Louise Shackelton on violin, Malcolm Johnston on viola and Jonny Byers on the cello. And together we're going to be exploring Brahms's F minor Piano Quintet, Movement 3. Brahms was born in 1833 in this ramshackle house into a humble family. His father was an innkeeper and his mother was a seamstress, but he showed early promise on the piano, and in his teenage years he was sent out into the world to earn money for the family. He did that by playing piano in a series of seedy nightclubs and bars, which kind of cemented him for the life he was going to have. By the age of 19, he was becoming really famous as being actually quite a good pianist, and he'd started to write music too. In 1853, two important things happened to him that changed his life forever. First of all, he met Robert Schumann. Schumann was already a successful composer. The two became friends, and Brahms became Schumann's unofficial pupil. When Schumann got sick, Brahms moved into the family home and met his wife, Clara. Now, we don't know what happened between Brahms and Clara, but we know that Brahms loved Clara, and Clara had an influence on every piece of music that Brahms wrote from then on, including the piece you're going to hear today. In 1862, Brahms moved to Vienna, and the job he had in Vienna didn't really work out, but he loved the city, he made his life there, and he became center of the musical world. Brahms's music is a mix between the old and the new. He was influenced by the great classical composers, Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven, and we can hear that influence in his classical structures and symmetrical shapes. He looked further back to the music of Bach and was influenced by his contrapuntal textures and fugal ideas, all of which you'll hear in today's piece. But most importantly, Brahms was an innovator. He pushed the boundaries of conventional harmony and melody to express his deep emotional thoughts. That's another thing that we're going to hear in today's piece. The Piano Quintet in F minor started life in 1862. Originally, it was written for string quintet, 2 violins, viola, and 2 cellos. He showed it to Clara and decided to put 2 pianos into it, getting rid of the strings. She thought it was too epic for just to be played on 2 pianos, so he put the pianos back in, and as a compromise, we have the lineup today: 2 violins, viola, cello, and piano. It's in 4 movements. And as you'd expect, they've got classical names. The first movement is fast, the second movement is slower, the third movement is a scherzo and trio, just like Mozart or Beethoven would have done, and the last movement is a flashy finale. And you can see from the titles that Brahms didn't go in for flashy, romantic names. He thought music was absolute. It should just be music, it should stand on its own, and there should be no external stimulus in our minds when we listen to it. So, that's scherzo. It's a big ternary form movement, A, B, A. The A section is the scherzo, the B section a trio, and then we go back to the scherzo at the end. Let's start by hearing that opening scherzo. And for those of you that have got scores, that's bar 1 to 193. So at first listening, it sounds like there's a tremendous amount going on. And that's because of Brahms' contrapuntal texture and the depth of emotion that he pushes us towards. Actually, that whole section is made up of just 3 themes. We're going to hear those themes separately now. And whilst for the examiner we should call them A, B, and C, I'm going to give them a characteristic as well, which helps me to remember where we are in the music. First theme, theme A, I'm going to call sneaky and sinister. And it occurs right at the beginning, bars 1 to 13. I think that's sinister and sneaky, partly because of the dynamics. It's marked piano and pianissimo. And there's also some syncopation going on. We're going to hear it again without the piano, and I'm going to ask Jonny to play a little bit louder. He's holding down a tonic pedal. He's playing the note C, and he's playing it on the pulse. If you listen carefully, you'll hear the other strings hardly ever fit on the pulse with him. You might want to tap along just to make sure. That's syncopation. If we listen to that extract again and we put the piano back in, we'll keep Jonny playing a little bit louder, you'll hear that Liz is syncopating as well. That gives A really sort of unstable feeling. The other thing that's unstable and sneaky about it is the chord that's being sketched out. We know we're in C minor because Jonny's got that tonic pedal, he's just playing C all the way through. But the chord on top is completely not what you'd expect. So let's hear a C at the bottom, and then we've got an A flat, a C, an E flat, and an F sharp. That doesn't sound like a chord you would have at the beginning of a piece of music. It's far too unsettled. And what that is an augmented 6th chord. It's not just an augmented 6th chord, it's an augmented 6th chord on the 6th degree of C minor. So it's augmented 6 on 6. By the end of A, we've resolved to 5. We've still not had a tonic chord, but we have had a tonic pedal all the way through. This shows you how daring Brahms was with his harmonies. Remember, this is the very beginning of the piece, and we still haven't had the home chord. The next section, which we're going to call B, and I think of it as being spiky and jerky, sounds like this. It's at bar 13 to 21. Now, a scherzo, traditionally, is supposed to be a light movement. It's supposed to be a joke. That's technically what it means. This scherzo is not like that at all, but the B section is as close as we get to something light-hearted. And we've moved into 2/4. The beginning of the piece was in 6/8, but the B section is in 2/4. In fact, throughout the whole scherzo and trio, anytime you see 2/4, it's a B section. That'll help you navigate your way around. Now, as many of you will know, but let's just go over it again, 2/4 is 2 beats in a bar. 1, 2, 1, 2. Each one of those crotchet beats can be split into 2 quavers. 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2. And what you get is a very sort of straight, square time. It's the time that we march in. 6/8 is also in 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. But this time they're dotted crotchets. And each dotted crotchet can be split down into 3 quavers. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. Which is a much more sort of lilting, swinging feel. Brahms really makes use of this in the piece, going from 6/8, that looser, swinging sound, to 2/4, the strict sound. And sometimes in 2/4, he'll use triplets, which means you're sort of hinting at 6/8 whilst you're within 2/4. By doing that, we get some really interesting cross rhythms, which we'll talk about a little later on. Now, in the theme that we just heard, the whole thing is revolving around the note G, the dominant note in C minor. Let's listen to it again and notice just how many Gs there are in theme B. And those chords at the end are very, very interesting because it's Brahms looking back to an earlier time. We're going towards G, but he still has a B flat in there. So we're sort of in a sort of G minor place, which has no business being in this bit at all. But by doing that, what Brahms is doing is he's becoming modal. He's using modal harmony. And at the end of that section, the chord that we end up on doesn't have a third. It doesn't have a major third or a minor third. So in one way, it's tonally ambiguous. But in another way, he's doing something that was used way back in Renaissance times, not having a third at all, because back in the Renaissance times, the third degree of the scale wasn't important. Now we need to hear theme C, and this is all about grandeur and pomp. That's the first time all of the instruments play together, and we have a very thick texture. In those 16 bars, Brahms shows us that he can invent an idea and he can immediately develop it. So the first 8 bars are homophonic. All the instruments are playing together and the chords are coming at the same time. In the second 8 bars, the piano is delayed and we get polyphony. The chords are no longer lined up and neither is the rhythm. Let's listen to it again, bearing that in mind. The C section is in C major, which is not what we'd expect. Brahms' Scherzo is in C minor, so we'd expect him to go at some point to the relative major, which is E flat major. That's what Beethoven or Mozart would have done. Brahms doesn't do that, not yet. He starts in C minor and he sidesteps to C major, which is called the parallel major. That makes the piece instantly brighter. We're also back in 6/8 time. Now, the whole Scherzo is based on these 3 ideas. That theme A, which was sneaky, theme B, which is spiky, and theme C, which is all about grandeur and pomp. The thing that ties all these ideas together are 2 simple motifs. The first one I'm going to call motif Y, and we're going to hear it played by the piano, bar 37. Another way of thinking about that is about knocking on the door. It sounds like somebody is knocking on the door. And it's a very clever motif because it works in 6/8, as you can see on the screen at the top, or 2/4 at the bottom, if it's expressed as triplets. And that's one of the ways that Brahms alludes to 6/8 when he's still in 2/4. If we skip on towards the end of the piece now to bar 226 and look at the piano part, Liz has to play both triplets and straight quavers at the same time in 2/4, creating some interesting cross rhythms. Listen. So Liz's left hand was doing triplets and doing that knocking idea, and the right hand was doing straightforward quavers. And together you get some really interesting cross rhythms. We'll talk more about that later. The other interesting motif that ties everything together is X. You might want to call that a playful little turn. Let's hear it played in isolation on the first violin. And now let's hear it in context, because basically that's theme B. So if we slow down X, we augment the rhythm, turning it from semiquavers to dotted crotchets. And if we put it in a major key, and if we add Y, that knocking idea, on the end, you'll see that we've got theme C. So theme C and theme B are completely related. Theme C is simply an idea from B, augmented, put in the major key, and add that knocking thing on the end. And that's a very clever Brahms thing. When you first hear it, you think, gosh, there's a lot going on. But when you look at it, you realize that everything is related to everything else. So let's see where we are at the moment. We've got theme A, that's that sneaky, sinister theme. We've then got theme B, that's the spiky, jerky one in 2/4. Then we've got theme C, the one that's all about grandeur and pomp, and is in C major and relates back to theme B. What does he do next? Well, let's listen. was theme A again. This time, that knocking idea, idea Y, is in there pretty much all the time as an accompaniment figure. And it takes him a while to get fully back into theme A, but when he gets there, he has that tonic pedal again. Pretty soon, though, the pedal that's played by the cello moves over to the piano, goes up from C to D, the supertonic, and starts to hint that we're moving into a new tonal area. That's exactly what we are going to do. We're going to repeat B, and now instead of obsessing around the note G, we're going to obsess around D. Let's listen. So, our structure so far, A, B, C, a new version of A, and a new version of B. And now comes probably the most interesting bit in the whole piece, a fugal section. Now, a fugue is a really complicated round. When you were kids, you probably sang Frère Jacques. You probably split the class in half, and the other class probably sang it a bit later on. They staggered the entry. By doing that, you created a round. A fugue is like a much more complicated version of that, because instead of just singing the same thing round and round again, everybody starts to sing different things and develop what they're doing. They go from singing a subject, one idea, to a counter-subject, and then maybe a second counter-subject or a third counter-subject. It's something that Bach was incredibly good at, and Brahms is having a go here. Let's listen to it first, and then we'll unpick what's going on. It happens at bar 67 to bar 100. Let's unpick that a bit. It starts with the subject, and the subject is played by the viola. Let's just listen to that. Then the piano joins in. The piano also plays the subject, but in the other hand, in the left hand, plays the second counter-subject. The first counter-subject is played on the viola. Let me just go over that again. The piano enters. The viola takes on a first counter-subject. The piano has the subject in one hand and a second counter-subject in the other hand. Let's listen to that. This is bar 71. The piano has picked up that subject, but in the left hand is doing another counter-subject, which then goes to the viola. So the viola is now going to do the second counter-subject, the piano is doing the first counter-subject and the subject, and the first violin is going to come in with the original idea, the subject. And you can see on the screen there's a sneaky little tiny subject 3, counter-subject 3, which, as you'd expect, starts life on the viola. As soon as Brahms has developed his fugue, has got it going, he fragments it. He does that to create a climax, and he does it in a really clever way. Each instrument starts to cut down what they're playing. They play less notes and they change pitch. Often they go up in pitch because rising in pitch gives us a feeling of excitement and climax. To really hear this clearly, let's just hear what the first violin is doing. Rhys plays his subject and it lasts for 10 notes. He does that a couple of times, and then he cuts it down to 5 notes, and then it gets cut again to 3 notes. Let's listen. This technique is called stretto, which basically means narrowing. The entries are coming in faster and faster. They're literally piling up on top of one another. The intervals between them are getting smaller, and the length of each entry is also getting narrower. So the whole thing is just getting more and more exciting. After that, we go back and we hear B. Everything has been based around B for a long time, so it's inevitable we're going to have a bit of a statement of B. And through this, we're going to go through several keys, but we're going to start out in E flat minor. So we started out in C minor. We wanted all the time to go to the relative major of E flat major. We still haven't gone there. Instead, Brahms takes another sidestep and takes us to E flat minor, which has taken us into a much darker place. Let's hear this new version of B at bar 100. Now, as we know, B is based around that turn motif, X. And in that short example we just heard there, we hear X, and typical of Brahms, we then hear it developed. Did you spot it? Well, it's in the second violin. Let's just listen to the second violin at bar 101 playing X in its original guise. And then 4 bars later at bar 105, she augments that from semiquavers to crotchets, and there's double stopping too, and we get this. After this, we go back and we hear C, that grand pomp theme, followed by A again. And we're moving all the time towards that original key of C minor. Before we do, though, we do finally go through E flat major, the relative major. So here's C, followed by A. Off the scherzo, we have a coda. Coda just means ending. It's based on that spiky, jerky theme B, and of course we have to get to the home key. But when we get there, when we get to C minor, Brahms has another little twist. He sharpens the third, so we go instantly on the last chord from C minor to C major. That's called a tierce de Picardy. So let's hear the very ending. So that's the whole scherzo section, section A of the overarching ternary form. And in itself, it has an interesting and slightly strange structure. Let's just have a look at the structure of that scherzo. We've got theme A, that sneaky, sinister theme. Theme B, the spiky, jerky one in 2/4. Theme C, that's the one that's all about pomp and grandeur. We then go back and we have A again with a slight change. That knocking motif Y is there all the way through. Then theme B again before we have that fugal section. There's more B, there's more C, there's A, and then there's a coda based around B. And if we look at the chords that we're going through, the tonal areas, we'll see it's incredibly unusual and not what we expect. Obviously, there's a lot of C minor in there, but there's chords that somebody like Beethoven really probably wouldn't have used. He probably wouldn't have gone to B flat. He probably wouldn't have gone to E flat minor. And as Brahms is moving between these keys, he's going to a lot of unusual areas along the way. Don't forget, at the very end, he slips us right at the end into C major using that tierce de Picardy. After that, we have a trio section. Now, in Mozart and Haydn's time, the trio came during a minuet and trio movement. And a trio was just a piece of music that was either played by 3 instrumentalists or was in 3 time. This is neither of those. We are back in 6/8, and we are now in C major. The trio section is in ternary form, so it's a ternary form within a ternary form. And it's much more straightforward than the scherzo. It's just A, B, A. The A section starts with a broad melody on the piano, and the cello, yet again, is holding that tonic pedal. Halfway through the A section, the violins and violas enter. They take on that broad theme, allowing the piano to cycle through some really interesting chords. Let's listen to that A section now. Did you hear that all the way through that section, that knocking motif Y is there, all the way through? So Brahms is still using ideas from his Scherzo in his trio. And what about those piano chords? Well, let's just listen to those chords slowed down and smoothed out, and you'll hear just how ahead of his time Brahms was. Modulated there from C major to B major. Now, whilst those are next door notes on the piano, they are as far away as you can possibly get harmonically. Somebody like Mozart would very rarely ever go from C major to B major. And if he did, he would take a lot longer and go by a much more convenient route than Brahms just did. And if you listen to those chords with our 21st century brain on, you can imagine them in any song that you get in the charts or any West End musical. Brahms, yet again, harmonically, incredibly ahead of his time. Next, we have a B section, and like all the B sections in the entire piece, we're back into 2/4. Again, we've got a broad melody played by the violins, and a complex chromatic line played by the piano and the cello. Quavers wandering around chromatically with a pedal underneath. If we just look at the piano part there, you can see that the right hand has got straightforward quavers, chromatically going all over the place. The left hand is holding down a dominant pedal on G and has got triplets. This is the bit we heard earlier with the cross rhythms. That dominant pedal is really important because it roots us down, allowing the chromatic activity to go wherever it wants to. Let's listen to it. It's bars 226 to 233. During the second half of B, Brahms reorganizes his ideas. The pedal goes onto the cello, allowing the left-hand piano to do much more interesting melodic stuff. Let's hear it. To finish off the trio, we have a repeat of the A section to prove that we're in ternary form. And this time, we're in a much darker place. Everybody is playing down in a low tessitura, at the bottom of their instrument. And there's a series of sliding pedals that take us down to F, so that the whole piece can finish with a plagal cadence and send us back to C. Let's just finish it off. At the end of the trio, the Scherzo is repeated to give us that overarching ternary form. So there's a huge amount to think about in this piece, but there are a few really key things to remember. In the Scherzo, there are 3 themes: A, the sinister one, B, the spiky one, and C, the grand one. There are 2 unifying motifs, that knocking on the door thing, which we called Y, and that little sneaky turn, which we called X. There's also the interplay between the sort of strict 2/4 and the slightly looser 6/8 that Brahms uses more and more as he goes through the piece. Remember, every B section is in 2/4. The whole piece has a ternary form: A, Scherzo, B, trio, A, Scherzo. The scherzo has a really complicated structure with that fugue in the middle, and the trio is a perfect ternary form all on its own. And Brahms uses pedals and cadences to mark his structure. The pedals hold us in the tonality he wants us to be in. They ground us down. The cadences push us forward. At the end of every section, there's a cadence, as you'd expect, but unusually, it's often an imperfect cadence. And because it doesn't come back to the home key, we want to listen to the next thing. That's a real Brahms trait. That's what gives us that restless Brahms feel. We're going to play the entire piece now. Keep an eye on the screen because we're going to flag up the structure as we go along.